Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a word we hear all the time, narcissist. But you know what? It turns out there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface than you might think. So let's just start there. When I say the word narcissist, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Seriously, get a picture in your mind. I'm willing to bet you're picturing someone who's kind of loud, definitely the center of attention, the one who dominates every single conversation, is openly arrogant, and just demands admiration. And yeah, that's the classic overt narcissist we see all over pop culture.
And look, that picture, it's not wrong. It's just incomplete. It's only half the story because it completely misses a quieter, much more subtle form of narcissism that can be just as damaging and honestly way more confusing for the people around them.
And this brings us to what you could call the two faces of narcissism. The overt type we all think we know, and the covert type that often flies under the radar. They share the same core issues, but wow, do they show up differently in the world. The difference, really, it's all about style. The overt or grandiose narcissist is just what we pictured, loud, proud, and openly superior. But the covert or vulnerable narcissist, they're kind of the opposite. They seem quiet, maybe a little introverted. Instead of demanding praise, they might use self-pity or passive-aggressive comments to get their needs met, all while secretly believing they're superior to everyone else.
So what is covert narcissism? Exactly. Well, you'll also hear it called vulnerable or introverted narcissism. And it's not about being the life of the party. It's really defined by this intense sensitivity to criticism, a constant victim mentality, and using these indirect passive-aggressive tactics to control situations. And when you look at the key traits, a clear picture starts to form. Underneath it all, it's fueled by this really deep insecurity and a fragile self-esteem. This can lead to being chronically envious of other people, always feeling like a misunderstood victim, and having this sort of smug, quiet self-centeredness. They can come across as insensitive and emotionally withholding, just in a way that's much harder to pin down than their overt counterparts.
This quote just nails the difference. An overt narcissist might literally shout, "Look how smart I am." But a covert narcissist, they'll express that exact same need by muttering something like, "People never notice how smart I am." You see, it's the same need for validation, just a completely different delivery system. Okay, so we've seen how the behaviors are different, but now let's talk about the impact, because even though the tactics are different, the wounds they leave behind are strikingly similar. Whether they're loud or quiet, the engine that drives all this behavior is exactly the same: a deep, fundamental lack of empathy for other people and an overwhelming need to control everything and everyone. And that combination is what causes such profound emotional harm in their relationships. And this is what makes covert narcissism so tricky, so insidious. The manipulation is often wrapped up to look like something else, like concern or love or even self-pity. It doesn't feel like obvious aggression, so it's so much harder to name. And you're the one left feeling confused, wondering if maybe the problem is actually you. And that feeling, that sense of self-doubt, it very often comes from a specific tactic called gaslighting. This is a form of psychological manipulation where someone makes you question your own reality, your memories, your perceptions, all as a way to gain and maintain control over you. Here's a really chillingly common example of it. A child says their feelings are hurt. Instead of hearing that, a covertly narcissistic parent might just shut it down with, "You're being too sensitive," or "You're just imagining things." What that does is it teaches the child over time that their own feelings are wrong, that they can't be trusted. Or they might go for guilt. You hear phrases like, "After everything I've done for you," or that classic line, "I guess I'm just a terrible mother." These aren't genuine feelings. They are really powerful tools of manipulation. They're designed to make you feel guilty and responsible for their bad feelings. So what's the end game with phrases like that? It's simple. Shift the blame. Suddenly, the focus isn't on their behavior anymore. It's on your reaction to their behavior. And you're the one left holding the bag, feeling responsible for managing their emotions.
And the toolbox doesn't stop there. Not at all. There's triangulation, where they bring a third person into a conflict just to make you feel insecure. There's love bombing, that initial rush of overwhelming affection to hook you in. And that's almost always followed by devaluation, a sudden, jarring switch to harsh criticism. And of course, the silent treatment, using withdrawal and silence as a weapon.
The result of living with all this, day in and day out, well, it can be devastating. People often describe living in a constant fog of confusion, with chronic anxiety, feeling totally isolated, and just having their sense of self-worth completely eroded. But awareness is always the first step toward getting out of that fog. So now, let's talk about it. Let's talk about coping with this behavior and the paths to healing, not just for those affected by it, but maybe even for those who recognize these traits in themselves. Okay, and before we go any further, I have to make something crystal clear. This is for educational awareness only. We're exploring patterns of behavior. A formal diagnosis of any personality disorder has to come from a trained clinician. Our goal here isn't to put labels on people, it's to better understand these really complex human patterns.
The good news is that healing is absolutely possible for everyone involved. For those who've been hurt, it's a journey of reclaiming your own reality. And for those who might hear this and recognize these patterns in themselves, it's about finding a real path toward genuine change. For anyone dealing with this behavior, setting healthy boundaries is, well, it's non-negotiable. First, you have to actually identify your limits. What is okay and what is not okay. Second, you have to communicate those limits clearly. Third, and this is a big one, you have to be prepared for them to be tested or even for retaliation. And finally, you have to consistently enforce those boundaries and their consequences every single time. Now let's just pivot for a moment to a different perspective. This is a real quote from someone online, someone who sees these traits in themselves and is actively looking for help. It's a really powerful reminder that behind all that defensive behavior, there can be a person who is really suffering and actually wants to change. So is that kind of healing possible? One of the most promising approaches in therapy is something called containment. The whole idea is that the therapist acts as a kind of safe container for the patient's unbearable feelings of distress. By holding that pain, the therapist creates a space where the person can finally start to explore their own vulnerability without getting completely overwhelmed. It's a way to make real self-reflection and connection possible. And all of this brings us to our final thought. Just understanding that narcissism isn't always loud and grandiose, that it can be quiet and victim-focused and passive-aggressive. That awareness is a huge first step. So the question I want to leave you with is this. How does understanding these hidden patterns change the way we see our relationships, and maybe most importantly, the way we see ourselves? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.